Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double On Radio Gamescast, episode number 32. We've made it quite a ways. Today, as always, I'm your host, Ryan, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Alex. Alex, that's it. It's your cue.
Hello?
Yep, there you go.
Oh no,
It happens every time.
You're good.
Is my mic not working again?
I think it's if you just say one syllable. That's it.
Okay.
We're good.
I need to draw out my greetings.
And Wyatt.
So you gotta have your greetings like mine that are not funny, but you think they're funny, so you just keep going and going and trying to make people laugh. And then
All right, I'm going to cut you off there because we have a show to do. This week, we're going to be talking about journalist impressions of the PS5 and Series X have been coming out, and we're just going to kind of briefly gloss over them because we don't have everyone's yet. We're not quite far enough along to get everything, but we have some general impressions. We have some overviews of some of the launch titles, and a lot of we've got some Valhalla gameplay we can talk about. Lots of fun stuff for next gen this time, and we're gonna just be having the rest of the show just be chill. We got 3 people. We're gonna have a nice time just talking about games, like we always do. All right. And this week first, because the award this week isn't really related to what we're talking about. It's more just something I wanted to do. So our award this week is the Double On Radio Gamescast Most Wanted Kojima-Directed Sci-Fi Game Award. So our competitors in this is a Hideo Kojima-directed Star Wars Battlefront 3,
oh my
a
god!
Hideo Kojima-directed Halo,
Oh,
or a Hideo Kojima-directed Mass Effect.
oh.
The Halo one would probably get out faster than Infinite by now.
Hey. Maybe the next Mass Effect game too, because they
We
haven't.
would have a
announced they're working on
build.
one.
We would have a build by at least January.
Oh yeah. So what's Kojima Productions' next game here? Is it Battlefront 3, Halo, or Mass Effect?
See, I feel like they like the options just kept getting better. So I'm gonna say Mass Effect would be really interesting because Mass Effect, I feel like more so than the other two, are super like character focused.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we would get the most interesting like WTF Kojima moments. So I'm gonna go with Mass Effect.
All right. How about Alex?
I'm also gonna go with Mass Effect for mostly for lore reasons because Star Wars. There's nothing that he can really mess with.
Yeah, he'd be
Except if we're going
restricted.
really, unless if we're going really deep into the lore, where the point of where proto sabers still existed, and this is turning into a Star Wars podcast again.
That's the point.
It's only when you're here, Alex.
And then Halo, I don't think he could stand working in also another, like, even though you have a bunch of lore to work with from the books, but it's still really restrictive in Kojima terms, and there's nothing really mind bendy that he can do with it.
He
that
can't be
usually
quite
likes
as
to
out
do.
there. And Mass Effect's been gone for a while. He could bring back Mass Effect with some flair.
Yeah, there's not really that much past history to exploring it. There's plenty of stuff to do in the future with more aliens and things like that.
I mean, this is the same man that brought to life a giant flaming unicorn in the opening hours of Metal Gear Solid 5. So if you give that man the Mass Effect universe, Lord knows what could happen.
It would be entertaining. I don't know if it would be good, but it would certainly be entertaining.
Yeah.
And I can't
I
wait
feel like
to
we're
see
all
what
in
the
agreement.
characters' names would be. Yeah, absolutely.
There would be
Yeah.
a strange way that you could refuel your ship.
Yeah, you use a BB from Death Stranding to
The
fuel your
entire
ship.
ship is
Oh, God.
powered by a baby.
All right. So you've heard it here first, folks. The game we most want to see directed by Hideo Kojima, who, if you don't know, is the person who directed Metal Gear and Death Stranding. That's what we want to see. Mass Effect.
Oh, and Silent Hill. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. So we've got some next gen impressions roundups. There's actually not as much as we might have implied to say about this because both Microsoft and Sony are limiting pretty heavily, like, a lot of the user experience stuff. So we don't know what menus really look like past the base like launch menus. We don't really know what the storefronts look like. We don't know a lot of that stuff, so we can't really talk too much about the UI. because I think it's pretty clear that both the Series X and PS5 have good baseline like game UIs, but that's the same for all the major consoles.
For what I understand, the Series X and S's like menu layout is very similar to Xbox One, which makes sense.
Yeah, it's designed to not be a hard transition.
Yeah.
What was that, Alex?
Oh, I was just, speaking of their menu layouts. I haven't seen any of that information. Are they?
They're
I
in
think I
gameplay
saw.
stuff now. It's not a ton of information. It's just basically the Series X stuff looks very similar to the one.
I think
And
PS5 looks cleaner than
the PlayStation, from what I've seen from actually starting up the console, is it a black start screen with a little bit of like a lens flare or bubble thing going on instead of the usual blue wavy bit?
I think so. It's still pretty similar. It's not too crazy of a departure, but it is a like nice level of detail. I think it's very clean, which is a nice thing, and it's very animated. Most of the games have their own like animated back screens now.
Is it just me, or does it remind you more so than the PS4? Does it remind anyone else of like the PS3's menu at all?
Yeah,
Like,
it does
because
seem
I'm
similar
looking
to
at
that.
it,
It
I'm
does.
looking
It
at it
reminds me
right
more
now.
of the
It reminds
PS3.
me of that a lot.
At least in design
never-
intent, I don't think the way you navigate it is the same.
But
in any
visually, it
means.
looks very similar.
But yeah, it's taking some stylistic cues from it. Certainly, you can check out any like PS5 gameplays now to see what the UI looks like. It's pretty good. We'll have to see how people think about this after having the console in their hands for a decent amount of time.
I mean, UI is the kind of thing that changes over time. I mean, I still remember like comparing the Xbox 360's menu when it first came out compared to what it was when the Xbox One came out, and just how different they were. And you know, to be fair, like PS4's layout never really changed that much. They had small improvements over the 7 years it was out, but nothing major. But that's one thing that can change so much in a console's lifespan. So
yeah,
something to keep in mind too.
I mean, I think we can say both certainly look better than Switch UIs. Switch is still. I don't know. The Switch dashboard is still pretty bad comparatively, I think.
It's fine. It's all right. I don't know. Doesn't bother me.
It's missing a lot of features compared to either of the other consoles.
That's true.
Which is mostly what I'm referring to. The nice thing about the Series X UI that I like is it's super customizable. So you have the ability to like pop windows in and out wherever you want them, which is really, really nice. They're doing a nice push for customizability, and you've got a lot of customization of the, like, if you want a dark system theme, you can have a dark system theme. Motion can be like either smooth transitions or fast cuts. Lots of neat stuff. You have color schemes you can choose. Just a lot of customizability that I don't think the PS4 or PS5 is going to have. But the PS5 is designed to be a little bit more streamlined than the One UI, I think. They both have their benefits, and both certainly look good, at least from what we've seen. But of course, the consoles are not out yet, so we don't have them in our hands to really.
And this is a kind of a UI thing, but one feature, as you know, as long as we're comparing the two, one feature that Xbox does have that PlayStation currently doesn't, and this is less of a UI thing, but it's somewhat related, is that it can run multiple games at the same time, which is pretty.
Yeah, which I think will certainly be up to your use case for if that's something you value. I'm the kind of person that tends to only play one game at a time because I focus better on one game at a time.
But I mean, it's the kind of thing where it's like not everyone may use it, but like it's
that's what I'm saying.
You might as well have it.
It's useful to have for people that will use it. I don't think it's as important of a feature as Xbox has kind of made it out to be. Because I'd rather have better single game performance than dual game.
I'm thinking of like, say you have like a game and then the game's like direct sequel playing at the same time. Like, what would that?
Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales.
Like,
a little crazy with it.
I don't know. I feel like there's some interesting, like, weird, hacky stuff you could do with that, but I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah. I thought
it was worth pointing out.
We got some load time comparisons for the consoles. They're pretty much exactly on par for the most part.
I'm not gonna lie. When I was watching a review for Miles Morales on PS5, and they showed the guy showed us how long it takes to get from like the menu to in game. And like when I saw it, it was such a short amount of time. I like out loud was like, "Holy crap!" Like
it's impressive.
It was shocking.
And I will say, when I was talking about load times, I meant startup times, not load times. Load times are, from reports right now, a little bit better on the PS5.
That's interesting. I've heard
not by a large margin, but
I've heard the opposite actually.
Well, in-game load times, not like loading to the game, but essentially scene transitions and whatnot, stuff where the game has streaming data from what's already been loaded.
No more subway scenes of Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Well, because I feel like SSD and load times, that's going to be the big like thing that consoles have going for them over PC for a while. Because I think even with like the fastest sort of consumer grade SSDs you can get for a gaming PC, it's still not that fast because that's insane.
I mean, the fastest consumer grade stuff for PC is faster, but the issue is you're loading a lot more because PCs have to have like the OS running and a ton of they're not designed just for games. So the amount of things you have to be loading constantly is way more. So like, just for example, to just run this podcast, I have to be loading OBS to record, I have to be loading Discord to talk, I have to be loading my Chrome to be able to do stuff. Whereas on a console, you're loading usually just like the store in a game. So that it's not like you're running tons of complex processes, and especially if you're recording something like that, takes a lot of computing power from your system. So
because I mean, even because I'm thinking back to like, you'll have channels like Linus Tech Tips that are like, okay, let's just make like the absolute no compromises, like best, most powerful PC we can. And thinking back on whenever I watch those videos, it's like I've never seen a game load that fast before on anything. It's
that's
crazy.
because games on PC are constantly, they have to load the stuff they need.
No, I know. It's just but like even with that, it's still incredibly impressive. And again, I think that's like the their trap card. That's like the console trap card for a while. It's just how fast.
Well, it's also that's where we're gonna get a little bit into the PS5 hardware, is the like trap card essentially, because the big push PS5 appears to be making this gen is, at this point we have pretty much conclusive stuff that the PS5 is slightly less powerful compared to the Series X. Not by a huge margin, but by a margin. Like, it exists. I think it's similar to the margin between the Xbox One and the PS4 at launch. So it's not huge, but it does exist. And the way the PS5 is kind of getting around that is by offering stuff like 3D audio for headphones and a whole suite of haptics on the controller, which is what has me super interested. And I really, really hope Microsoft comes out with something similar at some point, because the thing that blows my mind, the controller. So we're gonna do a rundown of just the controller features, because there's a whole lot to talk about.
And I can talk about at least the DualSense controller a little bit. I've been messing around with one for the past couple days or so. Obviously, I don't have a PS5 to test it on, so I don't have any of the fancy features. But I've been using it. But I've been using it as a PC controller, so I can speak to the how it feels to use.
So we'll do a like tear down, and then we'll talk about Wyatt's impressions so far. So for the features this controller has, it's a bit bigger than the PS4 controller. It's a fairly chonky boy, as we would say.
Which I prefer.
Yeah, I definitely prefer that too. Especially, I have pretty large hands comparatively. It's why I love the Switch Pro controller is a really good size, but the PS4 controller is a tiny bit small. So I'm excited to see them getting a little bit larger. The adaptive triggers is the first major thing. So the controller has triggers that can change and provide tension and like kickback. With PS5 games that support it.
Which feels like a feature that you would find on like a fake prototype of like, oh, the next PlayStation is going to have all this crazy stuff. It feels like something you would find on like one of those.
Well, to me, it's like it's HD Rumble essentially, right? Where it's a feature that I think doesn't sell super well, but it makes a huge difference when you have the controller in your hand. Because from every impression I've heard, that's like the most impressive thing. Is when you're playing, like Astra's Playroom has a bow demo, and if you pull the trigger back to pull the bow, you feel the tension of the trigger rising like a bowstring would as you're pulling back. And then if you use a minigun and you hold it down, it kicks back like a minigun would.
Oh.
When you're doing it.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm like, that's just super cool. That's the kind of thing that is super immersive without needing the game to do a lot more. Yeah, which I love that kind of thing. So adaptive triggers are a thing. I think Wyatt, you definitely haven't been able to test that because it's a PS5 feature. It's not
Yeah.
like normal.
I
computer
I will
feature.
say, because I personally know a lot of people, and I've read a lot of stuff online where people are like, oh, Rumble's cool, but like, who really cares at the end of the day? I used to feel the same way about that, right? It's like, oh, you have a Rumble, whatever. There was the moment, the game that made me change my mind about that, shockingly, was Call of Duty World War II. Not that that's a particularly good game at all, but it did. There was one moment that it did with like Rumble in a controller that I thought was really, really cool. There's a moment in the campaign where someone's shot and you're like trying to stop them from bleeding, right? So the character has his hands on like the bullet wound, and you can feel the rumble of the controller is like that person's heartbeat, and as they die, you feel
Oh,
like the heartbeat becoming like more distant and
oh,
faint, which was such an awesome like little moment. And I was like, oh crap, that's actually really cool. So I'm actually really excited by like more HD Rumble style stuff in like modern controllers, because you
Yeah.
can deliver things like that. They're not like gameplay necessary, but it's just awesome little like additions and ways to immerse you in whatever you're playing.
And it also really differentiates games from things like movies and other media,
Yeah.
where it's one of the huge things that games can do that other media really can't, at least not in a way that's reactive. Because like a movie, if you're in a specialized theater, certainly could like vibrate and whatnot, but you're not going to have it reacting to what you're doing. Which I think the big like wow moment for me with HD Rumble, which Nintendo has been pushing for a long time, and it was something that people thought was kind of like a joke when the Switch came out, and it became a lot more important post-launch when people were like, yeah, this makes a big difference. Lockpicking in Skyrim. You can lockpick by feeling the
oh,
vibrations with the Joy-Cons. It's
ooh.
incredibly fun. it's
Seems a
That's
lot more
like
engaging.
it's super engaging. It's a great way to do the minigame, and they work really, really well. It's
Even
super fun.
Microsoft has with the Xbox One controller. I forget, it's probably like most of the Forza games that came out for Xbox One, but they had individual like sort of rumble motors in each trigger, right? And so they do this cool
Yeah.
thing where like if there was a car coming up on your left or right, the left or right trigger would kind of rumble to indicate that someone was kind of on your tail, which I thought was really cool. Not a lot of games took advantage of like those individual motors, but that was a nice little touch on that
Yeah.
as well.
And the big difference between, for people that don't know, HD Rumble, which is the Switch's thing, and regular Rumble, is that HD Rumble is a little bit more dynamic, and it kind of has, it's not quite locational as much as the PS5 controllers haptics are, which we'll get to, but it's a lot more accurate than normal Rumble. It can be used to replicate a much wider range of sensations, and it can basically be used as a mini speaker as well. There's some really cool stuff you can do with it. So it's a lot of like minor improvements over standard Rumble, but they add up. And that brings us to the PS5's Rumble, which is like full haptic feedback essentially around the entire controller, where there are tons of like little rumble motors around the controller that are locational. So a big example in Astra's Playroom is if it's raining, you can feel rain hitting the controller at different locations that are random.
Right.
Which like blew a lot of people's minds. You've got like different types of kickback. If you're using you're like walking along a pathway, and you're stepping, you feel left for your left foot hitting the ground, right for right foot hitting the ground, that kind of thing.
Oh,
Just
wow.
really, really cool little uses of that rumble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's like the major features. 3D audio is also a thing. We don't really know what that's like until we have it in our hands, because the reality is like 3D audio has kind of been a tech for a long time. So I want to see if this is really different from what would be considered normal 3D audio with stereo speakers, or if they're using some different thing here. Right now, they only support 3D audio, at least at launch, through headphones. They're saying they're going to add support for other stuff after the fact, but right at launch, it's going to be just headphones. I'm not clear yet on if that's just the Pulse headset and like Sony and specific headsets that are designed for that 3D audio, or if it will also work with standard headphones.
I hope it's just not for the Pulse, because that would screw over
The
a
big
lot of different
question
people.
is if it needs, and maybe they've said something on this since then, but we didn't know if it was something that would work.
Sony is
No, there's the thing. Here's some information on it. So yeah, you have. It does work with any headphones, but we really don't know if it's going to be a feature that is dependent on like the quality of your headphones, or if it's the same as like PC 3D audio, which has existed for a long time. So I'm curious to see what that's like. That audio is a really hard thing to mimic, because even if you are showing 3D audio, that doesn't mean it's working on the people watching the video, because the video might not support it. So it's like HDR, where you really can't show HDR to someone without them seeing it in person.
Right. I do want to say as well, this is now standard on both PS5 and Xbox Series controllers. USB-C connection is here. Oh,
finally!
My lord!
Well, it's about time.
Exactly. No, that was like my actual reaction to that. Was like, that's honestly for me. That's like one of the biggest things.
Plus,
like,
USB-C is way more durable too.
Yeah, well, it's a great cable. It doesn't break on you. Like the tip doesn't break on you nearly as much, and you can put it in any way you want. Because like with micro B, it's like you have to have it a specific way. You got to have like the short end on bottom or whatever, and it's like so annoying. It breaks so easily. It sucked. USB-C is here, and that makes me so happy.
Yeah,
so happy.
Very exciting. It also means that you can charge your controller with a lot of things that aren't just your console now, because USB-Cs are everywhere. It's what a lot of phones use. It's what Nintendo Switch uses for all of its stuff. Yeah, it's great to see a push for that coming through. And again, this isn't like a dig at this gen of consoles, because USB-C really was not a big technology when Xbox One and PS4 came out.
No, but it's still really great to see it now. Like they didn't skimp out, because I mean, there's tech that's come out this year from like, you know, big companies, a lot of like expensive tech that still use micro B, which is the worst. So, and you know, before we move on from the controller, just I've been using it, like I said, for the past couple days. Honestly, I was never the biggest fan of the DualShock 4, just because it felt, you know, the thumbstick alignment aside, which is not my preferred. I prefer the Xbox kind of offset one, but it always felt a little too like small for me. And then that was like the biggest thing that I noticed for the DualSense controller is just it's chunkier. It's a bit thicker, which I personally prefer. And kind of, you know, aside from that, I think the D-pad feels a lot better. It's not quite as doesn't feel quite as mushy.
More clicky, tactile.
Yes, I was fan. What was that?
More clicky and tactile.
Definitely, yeah.
Which is good to hear, because that's been like an issue with the PS4 controller since launch, is that the D-pad's not amazing.
Yeah, and then I'd also say that like the thumbsticks from the outset look fairly similar, but they have a much better texture on like the outer rim of it that I feel like is much grippier on my thumbs.
They're also more concave. So they have a little bit
really?
Yeah.
That was, man, I could not stand PS2 and PS3 controllers, because those convex thumbsticks, I cannot stand them.
Yeah, they're super hard to grip. They just like stick out.
And then like PS4 was like, okay, that's better.
Better, but not great, because it's still it's just like down a little bit.
And then PS5 is much better. I would say that the things that feel relatively unchanged are the bumpers and the triggers. The shape is slightly different, but they feel pretty much the same, which means that I'm not like, they're okay. I prefer the Xbox One's kind of like more angled triggers personally, that has a more like definitive press to it, whereas PlayStations have always felt a little mushy to me. But I mean, they're totally functional.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they're gonna get around that with the adaptive triggers and have them click at like a higher location.
That's the big thing. And I was thinking about that too. I was like, I'm kind of surprised, because they have this adaptive trigger thing. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't allow for some kind of customization in that, where like if they can change the way that the triggers feel, I feel like it would have been kind of a neat addition.
It's possible
to allow you through software.
We don't know if that's not coming.
That's true. It's not here now, but I would be surprised.
I mean, neither is our PS5. Like PS5s aren't in hands of the group, and I think it's enough.
Right.
They've said there's a lot of
I
stuff
haven't
people
heard
can't
anything.
talk
All right,
about.
let me put it this way. I've never heard of a feature like that, But if they can change the way your triggers feel, I would very much appreciate some sort of software that allows you to change it to get it the way you feel. Because after using an Elite controller for a long time, one thing I really miss is you can change the travel distance of your triggers to be really, really short, and I've gotten really used to that because I think it really helps it, especially if you're playing like a competitive shooter that distance is a lot shorter. So. But no, I like it a lot more than the DualShock 4. I think it's a huge improvement. Like a lot of small things,
we're not
but
done
I think it
yet,
adds
Wyatt.
up.
We're not done.
I know.
Yet.
I'm just
keep
saying.
Going.
I'm just saying. But in terms of like the feel, I think it's much better. And the only thing I really don't like is that everything's in white, and every time I look at it, I have to.
The white
is
a little aggressive.
To, like, rub it off to make sure it's clean because I can't stand white technology. I can't do it. White color.
All right, so there's some other stuff with the controller that we kind of skipped over in that. There's a much higher quality speaker in the controller now for sound effects that come through the controller, which is a game dependent thing. That's like if the game wants to have that, it will have that.
There's no more light bar on the back. There is a light that's kind of on the left and right side of the touchpad, but there's no kind of like large light bar between the triggers and bumpers anymore.
Is there a reason for that?
Light bar, no one used it. It wasn't really used for anything.
What was it used for? Oh, yeah.
That's the thing.
I think initially it was supposed to be like, we can do motion controls easier because the PS4 can like detect the large light bar.
But then later PS4 versions like don't have that camera, and you would need a PS camera to use that. Basically, it was purposeless.
And speaking of the touchpad, obviously I can't speak to if functionally it's any better, but it is bigger on the DualSense than it was in the DualShock 4.
From what it looks like, it's a lot more accurate as well. From what I've seen of Astros, where they show like a demo of how to calibrate the touchpad. Essentially, it's a lot more
because it was not great on the DualShock 4.
Well, on the DualShock 4, it can basically be used to swipe in a direction. That's about it.
I remember
is really hard.
I remember when I played my first game on a PS4 was Assassin's Creed 4, and you could pan around the map screen using it, kind of like a trackpad, and it was terrible.
Yeah, it did not function well.
I just remember using it to pull up your journal in Uncharted 4, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's like that kind of little thing. All right, and we have better gyro this time, so the gyro is just improved. It's essentially, I would say, on par with like Switch gyro now.
It's just better.
I'm excited about that. I love games that allow like gyro aiming. It's something that I just think adds a lot to it if you don't like aiming with thumbsticks like I do. Gyro aiming in Days Gone was one of the reasons I really liked that game. Is it was a lot easier to play on a console because of that gyro aiming. So I'm hoping to see that in more games. At least like support for it. Especially, I think third-person shooters mostly. First-person with gyro tends to be a little bit nauseating to a lot of people. I don't get that, but I know there are a ton of people that do.
I'm right there with them.
It's your boy.
I think third-person generally avoids that issue. But yeah, so the controllers are some really cool tech, and you get one with every PS5,
which is pretty nice. Yeah.
Yeah, PS5s are still pretty hard to come by. This podcast is coming out on a Tuesday. PS5s launch in 2 days from now, essentially. So that means you have a chance to get one on launch day if you are ready, because they have confirmed that there will be no in-store sales of PS5s. It will all be online.
Which is fairly understandable.
Yeah, I would say it's more than understandable. It's like very responsible, I think, of Sony to do that.
Well, it's funny because like I've seen people complain about that. It's like, do you really want to go into a GameStop right now? Like, what? Why do you? What do you?
Yeah, like, do you want to wait in line with possibly a ton of people to go in and like get the stock of a thing? And you can order them to pick up at a store, so you can still go into the store and get it. It's just you need to place that order online beforehand.
Look, man, I get it. We're all excited about it, but Bug Snacks is not worth getting COVID for.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right,
we're talking about Bug Snacks.
Talking about Bug Snacks. All right. So yeah, that's generally how launches are going to go. I think the Series X is not confirmed to be doing that yet. They might be. I would bet they will be, especially after Sony.
I would be surprised if they were selling physical.
Yeah. Certainly, it would be a weird decision after Sony's done this. and I think it would cause some major worry at a lot of game stores and big box
Definitely.
retailers. So, all right, we've got some other like impressions. We got some impressions of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which are generally pretty positive, which is nice to see. I have heard the writing is basically the same thing you would expect from Odyssey. It's not a huge step up. It's also not a step back. It's just like
that's disappointing.
it's a little disappointing, but
Odyssey's writing was always like, I see what you're going for here, and this is really cool. But your writing, your writing is so bad sometimes that it's so difficult to take anything.
And there was
seriously.
definitely some stuff when I was watching the gameplay where I'm like, this feels distinctly not very Viking. I think Viking culture is super hard to portray in a way that's like respectful to the culture and also conscious of the fact that Vikings did a lot of
there's so little of it.
Bad things.
There's so little Viking culture that has been recorded other than orally by them. It's mostly accounts of, oh, wow, they are exclusively destroying, my crops, my village, my
family,
people, my family.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very curious to see how Valhalla is going to handle that, because we don't really know yet. And I think they're in that weird spot of being a pseudo-historical game, where it's going to be really hard for them to draw that line of, like, where are the historical elements and where is the bit that's like, okay, we can't show this in a game, and we have to, like, tone this back.
Plundering resources except for produce.
Because from my knowledge, they're almost making it like a story about some form of like honor and survival. So I'm super curious to see. And my biggest worry is that it won't feel very Viking.
See, I don't understand. I don't understand why they keep putting off setting a game in feudal Japan. This is such an overused argument, and I get
Tsushima
that. But like,
and Sekiro did it before.
Perfect, but we've been asking
Sekiro's
about
super
this
different, though.
years.
I don't think
before
Sekiro
was
would be
even
competing with it.
It's in the same, I guess, pseudo setting though.
Sekiro is super fantastical though, and I think historical Japan is still super underutilized.
Well, are we talking about Tsushima proper here, or are we talking about Tsushima Legends? Because Legends goes off the chain sometimes.
That's its own thing.
It goes off the rail.
I mean, there is. I've noticed the Assassin's Creed games have been getting a lot more fantastical as well, especially with the being able to fight a Gorgon and a
that's part of the stuff I love. I actually think that those were super cool elements of Odyssey. The Atlantis stuff was really interesting.
It just came in out of nowhere. It was hilarious.
Like,
what?
I know.
Oh, okay.
They're not bad. They're fun, but it also brings into question not necessarily historical accuracy, but the theme of it's science fiction and fantasy at the same time in there, and it's
getting a little muddled.
It's
trying to go for.
Yeah, I still think they really need to start dropping some of the modern day stuff and just focus on like the crazy weird alien tech being in the past, and just cut the references to modern day. Because like I can still get behind people chasing apples of Eden and whatnot without modern day context.
If you leave it as this like mysterious, like these mysterious artifacts that you learn a little bit more about each time you play a different game, that would be really cool without having to like over explain what they are in the future. It could be this cool.
I've yet to finish Odyssey. That's what we need to get back to when I get back home. But,
well, there's technically two endings to Odyssey. There's like the family part.
Well, we're not going to talk about those because we don't.
I'm not going to talk about it, but all I'm going to say is it doesn't end. The family part just kind of stops. It's very disappointing.
The modern day sections. I see absolutely no point into them other than halting the story for a little bit. It doesn't. For someone who hasn't played every Assassin's Creed game, it does not add
they don't
pick
up
thing.
And they don't start like getting exciting until almost the end of the game usually, which means those modern day sections are always the modern day sections are always super boring until like the halfway point, if not further, of the game.
Yeah,
and they're so spread out that like you can't get invested in them.
And as I've said before, probably the best use of the modern day section was in Unity because it never.
I've been playing Unity. It's great.
From what I remember, it never really fully takes you out of the simulation. There's moments where like the whole game goes into like a glitch, or like the simulation glitches, and all of a sudden you're climbing the Eiffel Tower during World War II as like Arno.
What? Oh, that's cool.
There's these crazy.
Yeah, we're
like,
not going to spoil any
sections.
other ones because
Anyway.
they're cool.
Please
They're
tell
really,
me more after
really
the
cool.
podcast.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed Unity is super interesting now, especially that it runs well. So I'd
It's
certainly
super
recommend
underrated.
checking it out.
Super underrated in my opinion. Anyway.
And yeah, I think it's certainly the best handling of the modern day stuff because it has those elements of like the start of the game is a game. Like you load in and then you see all these like rumored sections and you're clicking on a game to play, and then you get like hacked in from a like splinter group essentially. And then that's where the modern day stuff kind of comes in. It's not you walking around doing boring first person exploration like Black Flag
or third person.
It's actually it's short and it's interesting.
Wait a second. First person exploration.
Yeah, Black Flag was first person.
See, that was like
which
more
was really
interesting than the
It
others.
was a
I
little
wouldn't say
more
it was
interesting,
great,
but your
it was a
character
little
was
more
still meaningless.
interesting.
Like you had no character. It was
You might as well just been a floating little like iPad.
Yeah,
because...
those parts didn't serve much of a purpose because there was not a lot of narrative to them.
But again, I think they were slightly more engaging than
they were also
like,
a lot shorter.
Any of the Desmond
they were
sections.
much shorter
that's fair.
than a lot of the stuff.
That's fair.
I still think like the first game had a great Desmond section, but the rest of it just went off the rails.
Well, also Desmond's just a crappy character. Anyway,
he became less interesting as the series going on. Okay, so yeah, moving past that, the Hala impressions have been mostly positive. I would say we don't have review scores or anything yet, but they'll be coming soon. So keep your eyes out for those. They might be out by the time this podcast is out. We've gotten some impressions about Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon, which are almost entirely very positive. The reviews came out for that. If you're into JRPGs at all, this seems like a really good way to maybe experience a wild take on them.
It's a timed Xbox exclusive, which I found really interesting.
Something that I thought was kind of weird from the most recent ad for it that I saw was that they were speaking in English.
Yeah, this is the first Yakuza game to have an English dub since I think Yakuza 2, maybe 3, the original, but the English dubs for the old stuff are notoriously bad. Although I've heard this dub is pretty good.
It hit me like a brick. I just didn't expect that.
I won't be playing it in English because I don't think I can mentally put together the Yakuza setting with English voice acting, but I think a lot of people certainly will be able to, and we'll get a lot of enjoyment out of that. It's also that this is like essentially the biggest Yakuza game that's come out. There's tons of stuff to do, and the JRPG progression system is a lot more in depth than what we got in the beat 'em up styles, which are still super fun, and I hope we get more. But I'm really curious to see what this new gameplay style takes. So impressions for that are really good. That's the launch titles we really know a lot about, and again, like Xbox doesn't have that. That's been a big like first impression from the Xbox stuff is that the console hardware is amazing, but there's nothing to play that I can't play elsewhere. Seems to be the prevailing sentiment from a lot of reviewers and journalists. Which I certainly get, and I think that's why they were pushing so heavily for Halo to be a launch title for so long, and this delay is like continually hurting them. So many
exclusives, just
the wind. We also got more delays related to Cyberpunk, which is really funny because it's another Xbox game. It's the Medium. The Medium was delayed. They didn't say Cyberpunk is the only reason, but they did heavily say that, like, our release date is after analyzing other games coming out. We can't compete with them.
They went smack dab in their window and they had to move.
Yeah, they were like, we're going to January. See you in a month.
Damn it, Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk is like by far the game that has the most catastrophic delay for other games.
Cyberpunk is walking up to everyone's like cafeteria table and it's just like shoving everyone out of their chairs so you can just sit at the table by themselves.
And then doing it again when it gets delayed again.
Yeah, it's great.
It's so interesting. We finally got the reveal of Mass Effect Legendary Edition.
Yeah.
We don't have. Yeah. That's kind of a jump from new next gen console information, but that's really it so far.
Well, that's not it actually, because along
we do
with
have
that
Series S stuff.
But along with that announcement, EA also said that there is a new Mass Effect game in the works, and They've
Kojima?
also released. They've also released. They've also released some information about Battlefield 6.
Yeah, so we know they're happening. They did say they're in early production, so it's gonna be a few years most likely until we see these things in any
Battlefield 6
playable
is
form.
2021.
Yeah, not Battlefield 6. I mean Mass Effect.
Okay.
So it'll be a while until we see the next Mass Effect game, whatever that will be. But the Legendary Edition is coming 2021. Which is just
We didn't
a
really,
collection of all 3 games.
We haven't really gotten
some
like a good
Series S.
graphics comparison yet. I don't think either.
Yeah, they've basically stated that it's just going to be graphical upgrades and not really any other upgrades, which is a little sad. I would have loved to see the gameplay systems unified across all 3.
Right.
To make it more of a consistent experience, but that would probably require a lot of reworking, especially to 1. And 1 is a very good game on its own. So
I also do want to mention, last thing about Battlefield 6 before we move on, is that this time around, the entirety of DICE is working on it, which I think is a very good sign, because I feel like that was...
It's definitely been a suffering...
How much have they been split up before?
That was the issue with both Battlefront 2, I think, as well as Battlefield 5, was that they had a very, like, fragmented studio working on 2 different projects, and then when Battlefront 2 was Battlefront 2, they took a lot of people from the Battlefield 5 team to go and fix that dumpster fire, which left very few people to actually finish Battlefield 5, which is why it came out the way that it did. So the fact that they have the entire studio working on 1 game is very promising, I think.
It's an all hands on deck situation.
Yes, and they gave them extra time. EA gave them extra time too, which is great. Yeah.
Which, I mean, is probably fine, because I think as iffy as Battlefield 2 and 5 have been compared to the older games, they're still going to be making a lot of money passively with microtransactions because people are playing them. They're certainly not as successful as some of the other Battlefield games, but they're still being played and they're still having that passive income from that. So they should be fine, I think. We did get some news about the Series S. So the Series S has a maximum storage size of 364 gigabytes. It is expandable, but that expansion card will cost you basically the difference between the Series S and the Series X. So you're probably going to be going with that low storage amount if you get the Series S. The upside to that is that storage sizes for games on Series X are a lot smaller because games aren't needing a lot of the higher res stuff they would need for 4K. So, like, Sea of Thieves is less than half the size on Series S. Gears 5 is almost half the size. So, but that does mean if you play Call of Duty Cold War on your Series S, that is one of 2 games you can install pretty much.
Right.
So,
and while we're on the topic of storage, there is a huge gotcha with PS5 in relation to storage at the moment.
Yeah.
Probably its biggest downfall at the moment, or its biggest downside, I should say, at the moment. You can hook up like whatever SSD, like external storage you want to it, which is nice, especially because the Xbox has its own proprietary thing. The problem is that you can't store PS5 games on external storage devices for PS5. You can only store PS4 games on it.
Which, to me, says they're going to be coming out with a proprietary drive that is fast
But that's
enough.
That's not...
That situation is mostly the same as with the Series X. So, and I think a way to put this in context, a lot of people may not get the reasons why the load time difference from the USB drives to the internal console loading would cause that kind of thing, but we learned in Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, the reason your swing speed is throttled is because the game cannot load fast enough to enable a faster speed, essentially, which they wanted to do, but the game was just not capable of handling it because the console couldn't load things that quickly. With locking things to internal, you get the benefit of games can now take full advantage of that load speed without needing to be playable on a lesser speed thing. The downside is pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I think this is certainly a thing that's going to be very divisive. For me personally, the biggest issue now is going to be like Wi-Fi speed, essentially. because the PS4 is pretty notorious for having a pretty iffy Wi-Fi connection a lot of the time,
man,
and downloading super slow.
So just as a little anecdote to that, my PS4 that's hooked up here, I'm on a college campus, so it's hooked up via Wi-Fi here. Every single time I want to connect my PS4 to the internet, I have to completely restart my PS4. Otherwise, it will not connect to the Wi-Fi here, which is pretty.
And that's an individual issue, but like wider scale, the Wi-Fi on the PS4 is bad for pretty much everyone.
Yes,
like that uses it.
I've never had to do
slow.
that. I've had to do that like, do it once every every now and then just because it's not working. But no, this is every single time. I've never had that happen before. It's pretty bad.
And it's usually not that like the Wi-Fi connection of the people of your house is what's causing that. It's the Wi-Fi speed of the servers, the bandwidth of the servers that you're downloading from. And for the PS4 servers, at least, those are not as high as they should be for
the PlayStation
how fast
Store,
Wi-Fi commonly is now.
The PlayStation Store at times has been completely like unusable.
Well, because a lot of the benefit of Game Pass on the Xbox One and Series S is going to be you can uninstall and reinstall games very quickly, because most people now will have, with these consoles, will have pretty decent internet, maybe not amazing, but still enough where you could download a game in like an hour. So you're never waiting too long if you want to play a new game. You just uninstall something you're done with, reinstall, or install whatever else you want to play. And on the PS5, I think that'll certainly be doable so long as they fix those bandwidth issues and make sure those download speeds are good, because otherwise that's a much bigger downside than normal. Because like right now, my PS4, the reason I use it so much is I have tons of games installed to my external drive, which I use for pretty much everything. So without that, it means you have to have less games installed. If you're swapping between things, you got to pick what you want, and they need to make sure that you can reinstall things pretty quickly. So I hope that is what the case will be. We don't have information on that yet, because that's going to definitely be dependent on the amount of people that have it at launch and how downloads do with all that. So we'll see. All right. That's most of our PS5 news, I think. And Series S, the 364 gigabyte, is clearly pretty iffy. But the console is a lot cheaper. The biggest issue is, again, that if you want to get that expansion block for it, you're basically now paying for a Series X, except you have worse graphics. Right. So, yeah, that's a major downside. But at least it will do its job as a like streaming game box, especially with xCloud. If xCloud is as good as we're hoping it will be, then it won't be as much of an issue.
Which leads me into something that I've been thinking about a lot. But one thing that I'm really excited for this generation as a whole, because it feels like now more so than any other generation that's had both Xbox and PlayStation in it, it feels like the three big companies that make game consoles, they all finally feel super distinct from one another. So you always had Nintendo, which was doing their weird Nintendo thing,
which they still do.
which they definitely still do. But for several generations, you've had Xbox and you've had PlayStation, and they've always felt very. They're
basically the same thing.
Yeah, I mean they've looked different. They have different library of games, But they've had, but they've been very similar, both sometimes in design and like what games they get, that kind of thing. But this generation, I think, is really exciting because everything feels so distinct from one another, and every niche that each company is in right now, they're doing it really well. So PlayStation is
like every company will have a space to exist. They're not directly competing with each other in the way that they used to, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you have PlayStation who's like, all right, we're just going to create like, second to none, like full on next gen games and exclusives for our system,
and really pushing that like haptic feedback and user experience.
Yeah, and then on Xbox's camp, you have like, we're very open, we're very approachable, and we're very much about unifying different platforms together. Right?
And like cloud gaming and streaming and whatnot. Like
it's not very
just a games box.
It's a very versatile, like easily approachable ecosystem to get into. And I feel like for a lot of people, they're underestimating how great and how important that can be. And then again, once again, you have Nintendo currently doing like
whatever
I mean,
Nintendo does.
but currently, like especially, and what I'm saying is even more so, they're not even doing a traditional console anymore. They're doing like this console handheld hybrid,
which I love.
right?
Like the Switch is probably my most used console with good
Yeah,
reason.
I would say Switch is probably like probably my favorite console ever. Right? I love that thing to death.
Yeah.
But it makes me so happy that like now it feels really weird to compare the Xbox Series to a PS5.
It feels like we're hitting the point where console wars are really a thing of the past. It's not really.
People are still going to do it. I've always thought it was silly and stupid to begin with, but it feels like now more so than ever, it feels so pointless.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, Xbox isn't bad. They're just doing something different. And you can also look at it in the sense of like, technically speaking, Microsoft and PlayStation are doing things that the others doing, but they're not doing it nearly as well, right? So you have Xbox, they do have like those exclusives that Sony's doing, but they're not doing it nearly as well as Sony. And Sony has backwards compatibility, but
it's not it's not as good as Xbox. Wyatt, you're roboting. Oh boy, I think we're losing.
Oh no,
Wyatt.
I think.
Oh,
are we good?
Boy.
Are we good? We're back.
Oh.
All right. We're having
What's all doing?
the issues we had last week. Hopefully this resolves in a bit. But some other stuff to talk about. We have we went over the Series S stuff. We got some other big news, which I don't know if you two have heard of a lot of the games news of this week.
Probably not.
We had an interesting leak. The Watch Dogs Legion source code has entirely leaked. 560 gigabytes of
the game about hackers got hacked.
Yeah.
And they didn't expect
for
this.
People that are confused, it says the source code is 560 gigabytes. In reality, it's the source code and the assets that are 560 gigabytes. Because source code itself is very small. It's not nearly that large. Yeah, that's the gist of it. Activision Blizzard made a whole heck of a lot of money. They made 1.2 bill off of microtransactions.
Of course they did.
Yeah.
So in 3 months as well. The time period there is pretty important.
Right.
All right. So this was an interesting PS5 feature that we didn't talk about. That the PS5 will tell you exactly how long you've played games for, including previous time on the PS4.
Awesome.
Which is weird because that means we know they've been tracking it, but they don't always show it on the PS4.
Anytime you have any kind of like storefront or whatever that doesn't have that, it's such a small thing, but it really bothers me because I want to know. You know,
it's just a
Please
nice
give
thing
data.
to know.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're like a full-time reviewer, it's really helpful to have whatever console or storefront or whatever that you're using to tell you how much time you've played as part of your like review process. You know.
Yeah. We did get one other PS5 confirmation that's a little bit sad, in that the PS5 does not directly support 1440p.
Yes, that's a huge.
Which is
honestly
to me such a strange decision because it shouldn't be that hard.
No, and especially because I feel like there's a lot of people that have 4K monitors. Like they don't have the money to spend on 4K.
Monitor.
Yeah, I think 1440p with like 120 hertz like gaming monitor, like that's the way to go in terms of like
achievable hardware right now.
Achievable hardware with something that's very affordable. Like that's like the sweet spot right now. And the fact that it doesn't support it, I think I can't even believe I forgot to talk about. I think is kind of a big deal. And I feel like it's something they can patch in, but it's disappointing that, you know, either they just didn't think of it or for whatever reason. I was very surprised
when that it won't output to 1440p. It will, but it's not rendering at native 1440p. It'll either be rendering at 4K and downscaling or at 1080p and upscaling. Neither of which is really an ideal solution.
Right.
All right. So this is, I think, our next piece of like big things we wanted to touch on. Marvel's Avengers led to a 6.5 billion yen loss. For people that don't know yen conversions, that's about $63 million, I think. which is a lot.
Yeah.
Square
It's a
Enix
bit
is
of a
certainly not
boo-boo.
struggling
It's an
because Avengers flopped pretty hard, but Square Enix has reliable subscriptions from Final Fantasy XIV that have been up, as well as some other major releases that have done well for them. Avengers, however, has not. It has done very poorly. The projected sales number of the game is close to 3 million. That's the assumed sales number based on the figures they gave us. And the assumed cost of the game was between 170 million to 190 million.
Oh,
So
oh
that
no.
loss of 65 million is somewhere in there where that like advertising budget especially would have been really, really important.
Oh boy.
So
I think in some ways this is like not in every respect, but I think in some respects this is a good thing because this is telling, Square Enix, this is telling whoever, like, no, it's not okay to release a game like this.
the thing I want to
know?
know is like, was it Square Enix doing this? Was it Crystal Dynamics? Like, who here is responsible? Because
My gut
normally
tells me
my gut would tell me Square Enix because they're the publisher. But Square Enix has also been doing a really good job with other releases lately. Like there was nothing
have
like
they
that
been-
in a lot of their other games.
Well, you say lately. Is it that those releases have taken up the time that they could have used on Avengers? Is this overlapping stuff?
Well,
That
Square
it was
Enix
an
didn't develop
oversight?
this. It was Crystal Dynamics. So
Oh,
Who made
as far as
Tomb
marketing
Raider, to
goes,
be clear.
who's in charge of marketing?
Square Enix, assumedly. That would be the assumption, is that Square Enix is doing it. The reality is, like, Avengers is such a weird case.
Well, they probably had to work
Yeah.
heavily with Marvel and Disney as well.
They had to work heavily with Marvel and Disney. They also, a lot of IDOS was working on Avengers as well, which is really sad because that was kind of part of the reason, presumably, why we're not getting a sequel to the last Deus Ex game.
Oh, wait, ever?
Well, we don't know. They haven't said the series is canceled, but they basically, IDOS got yoinked to help work on Avengers.
And Mankind Divided didn't do as well as Square Enix as well.
None of the
Well,
Deus Ex
Mankind
games ever
Divided
feel like they
sold
end.
well for a Cyberpunk game, but
But
it
it's
was
not
not
what-
hitting Square Enix's expectations, which
Yeah.
their expectations were like 200 million copies or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a very typical big publisher thing to do.
Yeah, but not to that amount. Like, Square Enix is notorious for those
That's
expectations being ridiculous.
That's true.
And like over budgeting, essentially, like giving companies way too much money for the return they're going to get. They just way overestimate what it is, and then companies end up having to do other things. So, yeah, I'm super curious as to who the like main fault lies with Avengers for why they chose to do this live service game.
Mhm.
Because it's hard to say it would be Crystal Dynamics, given their track record of the Tomb Raider games not really having anything like that. But we really don't know. Which is that's kind of the extent of that. There's not a whole else we can say until we have more detail, because this is all kind of extrapolated from the Square Enix financial report. We don't have hard numbers for a lot of this because those aren't public, at least not yet. So we'll see soon when we get more information. All right. So Kerbal Space Program also got delayed until 2023 from 2021.
Oh,
So some issues are presumably happening with that sequel, especially considering it's made by a different dev team.
oh,
So yeah, it's gonna be a while until we see that. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater got a big update. There's a lot of minor things that have happened. That's the major news. There are some like more minor things that we'll talk about next week after we have more information.
Well, you know what we didn't talk about though?
What?
Real quick, just because it's such a big profile thing, Miles Morales has been getting very good.
yes.
Oh, that's right. I can't believe I forgot to mention Miles Morales.
I
Also
kept
great
waiting.
reviews.
I kept waiting.
You know, I swore to myself that I wasn't going to immediately want to buy a PS5 because I'm perfectly happy with I have a backlog of games that I still have yet to play on my PS4, like God of War.
Hey, I mean, you can
need
play
to get
Miles
to that.
Morales on your PS4.
What?
Yeah.
It's cross-gen.
Yes.
Did you not know that?
Yes. Woo! Oh,
Well, that's the other thing too. I've heard a surprising amount of like
yeah.
YouTubers and outlets saying, "Oh, it's like the big PS5 exclusive." No, it's not. It's cross generation. Please don't please don't say that, and then it'll like people feel like they're forced to get it.
Yeah,
because they
it's
really wanna
setting
play it. No,
weird
don't do that.
expectations.
Fortunately for many people, you've heard it here first.
I'm really sad if you heard it
Like
here
me.
first.
Like me.
Yeah, I think this is the
Oh, I'm
PS5
so
release has
happy.
been super big profile, but yeah, it's also coming to PS4.
Oh, I cannot.
It's been getting great
wait.
impressions. I don't think we have reviews yet.
Yeah, we do. No, we have.
Did we?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
yeah, we did. We
my
did,
go
we did.
yeah my go-tos are. I know SkillUp has one. I think Easy Allies has one. Those
Yeah.
are kind of like my.
There
my
are
go-tos.
reviews of Miles Morales out, and they are very positive.
I wouldn't really. It's one of those games where it's like this studio has been pumping out such consistently high quality work that like I didn't doubt them for a second that it wasn't going to be good. Because I mean, think about it. The last couple of Insomniac games. Let's really think about this. They had the Jack and Daxter PS4 game, which was great. They had Spider-Man, which was great, and then before that, they did Sunset Overdrive, which I thought was great. You know, like it's just they've been pumping out such consistent quality.
They haven't
It's
released
like,
a bad game.
No.
Which
At least
is
not
impressive.
recently. I can't speak to their, early.
They're like PS2
years, but-
lineup. I'm sure something in there was a stinker, but that's the same for most companies that have been around that long. Recently, they've been knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, I would have been very surprised if this wasn't. Amazing.
And muted.
Oh boy.
But that was a good one.
sorry. That pun was miles off. I'm sorry.
All right, we're just gonna move past that and talk
Swing
a
and a
little
miss.
bit about what games we've been playing recently. We got through the the big setup of everything that we
These
needed
are
to
starting to
talk
stick.
about. We got past
Sorry,
the news.
Ryan.
Finally, it's fine. It's fine.
Oh.
This is running the show is like corralling a bunch of children. All right.
Wow.
And by a bunch of children,
I mean, you're not
just
wrong.
Wyatt.
I mean, you're not wrong, but wow.
All right. What have you been playing recently, Alex?
What have I been playing recently? Oh, see. Well,
Yeah, you play games, right?
I do dabble occasionally.
Just occasionally.
Well, I have finally caved to marketing pressure, and I have downloaded, but I have yet to play Genshin Impact.
Oh my goodness.
There's that.
Breath of the waifu. Sorry.
I'm also I'm trying to do this to get away from Destiny 2. But
No, I'm very proud of you.
There's a lot happening in Destiny 2 that I'm excited about. Like besides Beyond Light, the next season just looks so fun as far as a story premise goes. And I'm really just in Destiny for the way that the guns feel, which is very nice,
Mhm.
and fun story.
I agree with you on the first part.
You have gripes against their story, Wyatt.
I mean, fun story.
Do you not enjoy
is I think an
Sivu-Arath's
acceptable
invasion?
term. Good story would be
Yeah.
pushing it, but fun story, I can see that.
Fun story.
Anyway, what else have you been playing, Alex?
Oh well, for a while back for our horror games, Halloween episode. Wow, that took too long to. There was The Forest. I've been playing a little bit more of that, and it started to get funky. More
Oh.
funky than just the traditional horror bit,
Yeah.
and I wasn't expecting that at all. It's funky. And I finally played my first game of Among Us last weekend.
Oh, there you go.
Finally jumping on the Among Us train. I still
have
have not played Among Us.
Neither have I.
It's-
But I'm getting hounded by YouTube recommendations. Oh my word.
Yeah.
It's bad. Honestly, like there's always that one game that just gets a ton of coverage on YouTube. Among Us is bad. Like it's up there with like Fortnite when Fortnite was like at its peak, where it's like
I have
This is-
accidentally killed 3 people now in front of others because I can't get a handle on the controls. Just right in front of other people.
Yeah. I mean, that's how those games tend to go.
Was it with randos, or were you playing with a friend group?
With a friend group.
Okay, good. That definitely seems.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way to play that game.
There was a slow clapping the third time I did it accidentally.
Of course there was. Yeah, I'm curious. What are your general impressions on the Genshin Impact train?
The Genshin, I like stylized open worlds like that. I am nervous about the loot system from what I've heard.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
and
it's my
I'm
biggest
worried,
iffiness with the game right now.
and I'm worried that it's not going to be an easy pick up and put down game. Like I'm going to have to spend more than 15 to 30 minutes on it in one sitting to actually get stuff done.
We're going from one video game addiction right into another.
Yeah. All right. So I'll hop in the Genshin Impact train because I've been playing a little bit of it. I've kind of stopped at this point. I think I've hit the point where I'm gonna wait until they iron out some of the like bugs and whatnot that have been going on, and just like get the game to where they need it to be a little bit more complete. Because it's relatively complete right now, but there's not a ton of story content. You kind of just ends after a little bit. And past that point, if you want to keep playing, it's basically you're playing to do the gacha stuff, which
I'm worried about
not
that. I
super
I
fun.
finally I finally stopped Raid Shadow Legends because I finally just got tired of the gotcha.
Yeah, gacha stuff is like, gacha mechanics are one of my least favorite things. Genshin Impacts are less bad than some other games, but they're still pretty bad. And I think the idea of the end game right now literally just being you do repeatable daily dungeons and level up characters to a point where it doesn't matter anymore is just a little bit much to me. I much prefer more to that loop. But I will say Genshin Impact's combat loop is very good. Like the way they do elemental stuff is extremely well designed. And it definitely fun for that story section, which is a good like 10 hours or so, I think. So it's definitely worth checking it out. It's free on both mobile and PC. So you can check
And
that out. And I think major consoles too.
from not what I've seen from advertisers, but from other people playing, you aren't hounded with a bajillion pop-up windows too, which is also another one of the reasons why I left Raid Shadow Legends. Because I have to click
Play
the X
now
button.
for free. Sorry.
It's not free. It takes a toll on your soul.
Yeah.
But I logged into Raid Shadow Legends the other day just to see how many pop-ups I got, and I'd say trying to click the X button on a bunch of windows and upcoming events for 5 minutes is exaggerating it. It definitely felt like that. But I took a count, and there were 7 windows that I had to click off of just to see my little home base screen.
Yeah. I get that.
So bye-bye.
Yeah, the other games I've been playing recently, I always play a little bit of Warframe generally every week just because I love that game. It's very good. It's got a great in-game
it's your
progression loop.
go-to. That's your go-to. Like
It's my go-to. I want to
thing.
play a game for like half an hour and do
Still
a bit
feels
of stuff.
better on the Switch than PC for me.
I am really hoping they roll out. They've been planning to do cross progression for a while. I would love to see that actually come to things. So you can unify your progress across accounts, because that would really encourage me to play it on stuff that isn't just PC. I would love to play it on my Switch, but I have tons of progress on my PC account for like 7 years now, so I don't want to see that go away. Yeah, that game's just really fun, and they've been doing a lot of really cool updates recently. It's still got issues of like the dev cycle for free-to-play games is a little bit crazy, and that they're pushing out content at a rate that tends to mean there's bugs when it releases. Which I think depending on the type of person you are, you would either prefer you get that content earlier, but it's buggy. I'm the kind of person that would prefer to get it a little bit later, but it's not buggy. That's my preferred content release method, and clearly Warframe can't really afford to do that yet. I would love to see them reach a point where they can, but as of right now, that's not really possible. So yeah, that's always a game I got on the back burner. And then I have also been playing a fair amount of some weird stuff, like I always do. Noita, which is this weird little roguelike, like true roguelike, in that there's no progression across multiple
Oh,
runs.
is this the wizard like
Yeah,
thing with
the
the
2D
generation
physics-based
pixels?
wizard-like one. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I've been wanting to get it for so
I
long.
have been. This game is weird for me because I've owned this game for like a year and played it on and off occasionally for about 20 minutes, and then kind of was like, maybe not for me. And then it's finally clicked recently when I went back and did that same thing where like I went back to it to try it out again, and it clicked for me. I was like, oh, this is how you play this game. Like once that it clicks, you start to understand like why people love it so much, and it's really just like a cathartic experience of those like online dust simulators of particles
Yep.
that used to exist, but put into a game in a really good and condensed method.
Rest in peace, Flash player.
Yeah. So I've been playing a lot of Noita and a little bit of Teardown. I haven't played it, but I've watched it be played, and that game looks super interesting. It's a 3D version of like a heist thing with that same physics emphasis.
Yeah, I've heard about that because that was just like a really, for the longest time it was just like a demo of this really detailed physics engine. That
Yeah.
was it just one guy or like a small group?
I
of
think
people
it was
were
one
working on
guy
it?
for a while. I think
Yeah,
it's a
and
small team
then
now, but
and then they kind of turned it into a project, which is cool to see.
yeah, it's definitely shaping up really well. Which is very exciting to see. It's a cool like heist game, which is a weird thing to connect, like heists and the destruction of this really cool physics engine, but it works very well. It's very tense. And then I finally hopped on the RimWorld train and played a bit of RimWorld, and that game is also very fun. I'm gonna leave it there because RimWorld is a little crazy, and if you talk a little bit about RimWorld, you're gonna talk a lot about RimWorld. So we're gonna move on from RimWorld and just give a hearty recommendation to that game.
You still playing Legion from time to time?
I cannot play Legion. Straight up can't.
Right, I forgot about
So
that.
Legion, this is actually a good thing to mention. Watch Dogs Legion on all consoles right now, but it's affecting more users on PC, has a save corrupting bug that Ubisoft has yet to fix or really release a statement on. They've released statements that they're aware of it, but we don't know what the ETA on a fix is.
To be clear, has not happened to me, and I'm well past that.
And it has happened to a lot of people, including a lot of
Yes.
streamers. So the
Oh.
funny thing to me is it's happened to a few streamers like on stream where they were playing the game and then they load it up for a stream and can't play anymore. And
Can't play anymore at all?
yep, the only solution right now is basically to start a new save, which because you don't have manual save slots means you're starting a new game.
Oh
So
god.
if there were manual saves and you could have saved different slots of your save, this issue wouldn't be happening because people could just go back to the part where it wasn't corrupted. And the funny thing is, a lot of these corruptions are happening on a mission called 404, which is cosmic irony if I've ever heard
It
of it.
almost feels like there
Come
was
on.
someone in the team that really hated their team and did that on purpose just to mess with them. Like it
Yeah.
just. I'm not saying that's what happened. It probably didn't happen, but it feels like that. It's so.
It's weird.
But it could have.
It's an
Can't prove
issue that
otherwise.
like. It's also Watch Dogs Legion is having a bunch of other small bugs happening, like in the fact that things in
I
the
love the
menu
infinite
are
money,
like the menu key and the key bindings is labeled as smartphone, but Legion doesn't have the smartphone UI that the other games have, which is weird because like imagine if your Legion team were contacts on your phone.
I don't think that's a glitch. I think that's just an oversight that
It's an
should have
oversight, yeah.
been
It's not a glitch. It's an oversight.
easily avoided.
But I think the solution should have been make it a smartphone UI, and not the weird normal box
That might have
UI
been
it is now.
a feature like that might have been a victim of COVID development. We don't know.
Yeah, it's.
I
a
wouldn't be
thing-
surprised if that's what it was.
I wish their solution to that had been a delay. Like this
Yep.
game legitimately feels like it could have used another 2 months or so.
What has
Agreed.
Ubisoft delayed games or tended to delay
Yeah.
games like?
The Legion was delayed.
Oh, I mean, there was.
Really?
I mean, almost
They
all
had a
their
whole
projects
swing
was
of delays.
delayed. Yeah,
Huh.
almost everything they were working on past Breakpoint was delayed. After Breakpoint's reception, they like pushed everything back.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it certainly seems like Legion is a little bit underbaked, and my bet is that play as anyone system got ahead of them a bit with how much work it took, and they had to just cut a lot of stuff.
I also suspect, because we do know they like the very first sort of gameplay that was shown off, there were like leveling systems for your various
which they clearly removed.
Leveling in Ubisoft has never felt good to me.
So I wonder if like them going back on that decision also kind of didn't leave room for other things they were working on because that took their top priority, which is somewhat understandable.
It's weird because I've also been going back. As soon as Legion stopped working for me, I was like, I still want to play Watch Dogs. I'm just going to go play the original.
The original?
Yeah, and the original still holds up pretty well. It's not amazing. The movement's still really clunky.
2 is great, man. I love Watch Dogs 2 so much.
But some things I'm noticing with the original are that there's a lot of missing things from Legion that were in Watch Dogs 1 and carried over to 2.
Yep.
But just aren't in Legion. Stuff
we'll
like
get into that.
And
we'll get into that in our.
It's just weird that it's not there.
Yeah. And again, we'll get into that in our games club.
Well, that depends on if we can do one, because I at this point I can't play the game. So
I mean, we can do one where you've played some of it and I've played the other.
It's interesting because like this is one of the solutions where a AAA game has launched with a game-breaking bug, which is very rare. Like it's not something that happens often. And not only just a game-breaking bug, but a game-breaking bug that possibly has the capability to ruin your save.
If it comes to that, Ryan, we can always do an episode where like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were talking about that off podcast, but it's one of those situations where like this is a thing that I don't know how it got past testing.
Yeah.
And it's very clearly an indicator that this game is a little bit rushed out the door.
Yeah.
Which is concerning. It's also stuff like Ubisoft's had a string of that in the past where things have been kind of a little bit pushed, which is why they did those delays. And the big curious thing to me is that Legion's team was like, this game was ready regardless. We're delaying because we want to make sure the game is what we want. And I'm worried that maybe they cut a little too much out in that time period. Mm-hmm. That's the big concern. But yeah, that's most of our Legion talk, I think. All right, Wyatt, what you got for us?
I've been playing a couple different things. So in the background of whatever I'm playing, I'm almost always playing a few rounds of Modern Warfare every now and then, just because I love that game's multiplayer. So
of course.
The core multiplayer, not Warzone or co-op. But I love that multiplayer, so that's always in the background. I've been playing Legion, much like Ryan, but I haven't gotten that horrible corrupted save. So I've been playing a lot of that. Which I'm enjoying it, but its quality level is all over the place.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
There's some parts that are great, and then there are other parts that was like, what were you thinking?
And actually, we did learn something else. I forgot to mention about Legion. Their implementation of ray tracing in DLSS is apparently like very subpar performance-wise, comparatively, which is like a weird technology thing of the way they're implementing DLSS is not nearly as effective as it should be. Which I think is why, like, when you were doing testing DLSS versus regular, you weren't getting the huge frame boosts that DLSS should be giving you.
That's interesting.
So it was just a curious thing. It's not a huge issue because that's the kind of thing that, like, DLSS is new technology. People are expecting it to be a little janky. But yeah, it's not a huge deal.
But yeah, no, I've been playing that. I'm still enjoying it, but it's definitely very, very flawed in a lot of areas. Outside of that, I'm still doing a run or two of Hades every now and then when I can sneak it in, because Hades. I have started playing a couple new games. Ryan watched me play a bit of it for Halloween. Tail end of Halloween. I've been playing Evil Within, which is I really want to like it, but I'm having this.
It's a little dated.
It feels a little jank. It feels a little janky, especially with aiming. Because there are moments where like my reticle is right on someone's head, and I can see the bullet like not go right through their head and land in the wall, and it just doesn't hit them. It's very, especially for a horror game that like doesn't give you a lot of ammo, and especially with how like dying works in that game, it's very frustrating. But there's a lot about it that I really like. And then the other thing I've been playing is I've been playing a game that not a lot of people have heard of called Below, which was came out 2 years ago. It was a timed Microsoft exclusive. It's now on Steam and PS4. But it is made by the people who made Super Brothers Sword and Sorcerer EP, which is great if you haven't played it. But it's a gorgeous, minimalist sort of top-down roguelike with survival and crafting elements to it. And it's the kind of game that doesn't tell you a single thing about it, like nothing about the story or what you're supposed to do, other than button prompts that kind of hint at what you can do with something. It very much is up to you to figure out what you're supposed to do. And for someone who doesn't like either crafting elements or roguelike or like Souls-like games for the most part, I found it very interesting. I think it's really cool. Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe without you playing it because it's very much about its like atmosphere. But it's I got it for $10 because it was on sale for super cheap, and yeah, it's been really interesting and a lot of fun and kind of brutal. So I think
it's been fun to watch too. It's an interesting game because it's got weird Japanese design philosophies in a horror game.
It's a Western studio, or is it?
No, it's not. It's run by Shinji Mikami.
Oh, I wasn't talking about Evil Within.
Oh, I was talking about Evil. Yeah, I was not talking about Below. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I was talking about Evil Within. Yeah, should have clarified that. Which is a super interesting game to watch.
Yeah. No, I like it. It just feels very like janky. And what happens is when the game kind of janks out, it becomes very frustrating because you tend to lose a lot of resources in a game that already doesn't give you that much to begin with, which becomes very, very frustrating.
Yeah, it's like a symptom of an older style of design, which is aging out now. I think for good reason.
Honestly, there was a lot of moments in Evil Within where it felt like Last of Us.
Yeah, you definitely see the comparisons.
Yeah, even with like the camera angle, you're constantly crouch walking around. Yeah. With much, much worse melee combat.
I did not get to see any of the melee combat, I think, which made me very sad.
Well, it's very like, I guess this is part of it being a horror game, but it's like there's almost, unless you're using a weapon, like a melee weapon and not your fists, like there's almost no point to it. Like you're just like doing this dinky little slap where it's not effective in any way because it doesn't really stop them from coming after you, but it doesn't do any damage either. So there's just no point in doing it, and it feels very frustrating.
Yeah.
It's like it could do a little more damage, and I know you can upgrade it, but like a little bit more would do that. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point about Evil Within.
Mm-hmm.
There were some things we were playing last week aside from Watch Dogs, or at least I was. We played Monster Camp, which is absolutely a good recommendation to anyone who wants a weird Halloween-ish game to play with some friends. Monster Prom, not Monster Camp.
Yeah,
Monster Camp's the sequel.
I was about to ask, are you talking about the sequel? Yeah, no, we played Monster Prom, which is a great party game. If you've ever played a Jackbox game, it feels like a Jackbox game that's been fleshed out a lot more and stretched into a full game. It's really what it feels like.
Yeah, it feels great to play, and it's super interesting. I think we would definitely want to do a stream of it at some point, as soon as we have the time, because it would be a lot of fun. I think we need to get Alex to play that game.
Yes.
Monster Prom?
Yeah, Monster Prom.
It's a sort of the easiest way to describe it is a competitive dating sim, but it's not really competitive unless you're kind of the dick in the group and want to make it competitive.
Yeah, it's more of like a joint experience that at the end you get a lot of people will fail, people will succeed, and it's very funny. It's a
very well written,
humorous game that's got extremely good writing.
If you're a fan of the Scott Pilgrim books or just Brian Lee O'Malley's writing in general, it's
oddly similar. Yeah,
it feels very much like his writing, which is a good thing because his writing is great.
His writing's excellent, so I think that's a great game to play if you look into it. It's also dirt cheap all the time. That game's like $15 at the most, and it's constantly on sale for like $5. So great pickup if you're ever.
Oh no, you guys are roboting again.
Ryan's roboting, yeah.
Well, that'll happen. It's all right.
Oh goodness.
We deal with it in apartments with not amazing internet all the time. But yeah, that's the gist of what we've been doing this week.
Yeah. Again, though, like honestly, not enough people have heard of Below. It's really really great. It had issues on launch of being a game where there were a lot of mechanics that kind of bogged the game down and didn't really add anything to the overall design. And what they did was when they launched it on PS4, they created a whole new survival mode, is what it's called, or explore mode, excuse me, where they stripped down a lot of the survival mechanics and made it more kind of I wouldn't say bare bones, but they simplified a lot of things, which is good in this case because it just got rid of a lot of mechanics that were annoying and didn't really add anything to the game. And
Annoying
fixed
and
the pacing.
unnecessary.
Yeah, well, it was this really brutal thing where like, because you have to, kind of like Dark Souls, you kind of set up at fire camps or like fire pits that you can set as kind of like a save spot. But then if you die, you have to go back and uh, you have to go back to the fireplace. But if you die on your way back to the fireplace, then like you have to pretty much start from the beginning of the game and then make your way all the way back. And it was super annoying and just very brutal unnecessarily. So they got rid of or streamlined a lot of mechanics that just were not, that just didn't fit the game very well, and they made a much better game because of it. So, but for people who prefer the original, kept its game, basically, which is a great way to do it.
Repeat that, Wyatt. I missed the first bit of that sentence.
So they did streamline a lot of the different parts of the game, but they left the original game untouched in survival mode. And then they had a streamlined version called Explore, which I think is a great way of doing that because then you're not screwing over the people that loved that part of your game, but you're also making it much more easily approachable by new people.
Yeah, because that was some of the feedback I heard about Below originally, is that it was unapproachable to people that weren't familiar with that kind of game.
Yeah, the survival mode's just brutal. And not to say that Explorer mode is easy. It's not, but it's hard without it feeling cheap. Is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So
interesting. All right. So that's the gist of our show this week, I think. We've covered pretty much every topic we want to talk about. Unless there's any last minute news, which does happen quite often. Yeah,
it's our curse.
Nothing crazy that happened during the show, thankfully. We'll see if that, as soon as I say that, something happens that we'll mention next week.
Sunday night's a banger for video game news.
Yeah, it's so odd. We did actually. There is one small thing. Jedi Fallen Order is going to be on EA Play, which will consecutively mean it will also be on Game Pass, at least on PC. So
I feel like we've talked about Fallen Order on the show. Great game. I absolutely love that game. So
it's like a return to classic old school Star Wars games. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we do finish, there's one small PS4 thing, or PS5 rather, thing that I want to get out of the way. There's a lot of hubbub going around the past couple days that demo units of PS5s in big box stores were overheating. Just in case anyone isn't clear at this point, you're listening to this podcast and you're not 100% clear. Those were PS5 demo units that were encased in basically clear plastic boxes where they were not able to get proper ventilation. So overheating in a situation like that makes sense, and it has nothing to do with the PS5 itself. If it's in your living room under your TV, if it's in your living room under your TV, it's probably fine. It has nothing to do with the PS5. It's because they encased it in plastic, essentially. So just wanted to clear that up for anyone listening that was not 100% clear on that story. Just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, that's a good thing to transition to our shoutouts, because I'm reaching for that transition, sorry. But we have shoutouts that we do.
You're making fun of us.
It's about time to reach to our...
You should
at least I admit my faults. All right, Alex, what's your shoutout for this week?
I'll probably be saying this again towards the end of 2020 if we have a end of the year podcast. But yeah, I mentioned it once before. Shouting out to Adobe Flash.
Oh,
you will be missed.
It will live on in our hearts. For those that don't know, Flash is ending this year. It is going away for good, pretty much. Wyatt, how about you?
Shout out to the developers of the game Falconeer, who must be really, really sad whenever someone says Xbox Series has no exclusives on launch, and yet Falconeer is an exclusive that no one's talking about. So it must make them very sad when people say that it has no exclusives. So shout out to those lovely folks. Yeah.
I didn't know that was an exclusive. So you've informed.
Yeah. There you go.
Actually, it's also on PC, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's a
Microsoft
exclusive, which is the proper way to
term it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna give a shout out to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake because they just gave it a giant free update with new challenges and a bunch of multiplayer reworks, and you can now replay the game with individual skaters. It's a lot of really cool stuff. Love that game.
Wow,
so
it's almost
much.
like they cared this time.
It's almost like handing the Tony Hawk Pro Skater license to Vicarious was the best thing this franchise has done. So, yeah, Vicarious is doing great work with the Tony Hawk series. So I'm hoping they do a 3 and 4 collection as well, because that would be so much fun. And hopefully eventually Thug, because Underground is a super good Tony Hawk game. Would love to see a proper remake of it. Yeah, that's our show. We did it. We made it through.
Somehow.
Alive this time.
Whoa.
What happened?
It's our first successful run, as you would say in games. It's our first successful run.
I don't.
I'm gonna have to put down the clone that I made for the next podcast.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah, they were starting to get a little